We have learned that for years, Tony Fauci signed off on funding for gain-of-function experiments at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Tony Fauci approved of that funding despite a federal moratorium on gain-of-function experiments because they're dangerous. Now we know that Wuhan lab was almost certainly where the coronavirus pandemic began. Finally, someone asked Fauci about this. At a hearing today, Rand Paul became the very first. Here's part of the exchange.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of
Dr.
Virology.
Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina, not
You don't think inserting
in
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain-of-function?
That is
You would
not
be in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain-of-function.
Well, it is not.
Oh, so he just flat out denied it. But if you listen carefully, and if you kept listening, Fauci admitted that actually he may have signed off on funding of gain-of-function experiments. He went on to testify, quote, "I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done." Okay, isn't it your job to know what they were doing, since it was our money? But he said, quote, "I am fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China." What's the truth here? Alex Berenson has spent a lot of time looking into this and into the broader question of how the U.S. has responded to COVID. He's the author of Unreported Truths, the series. We're happy to have him on tonight. Alex Berenson, what is... So that Nicholas Wade piece, as I know you have read, laid it out, I thought, with a lot of clarity, how U.S. tax dollars wound up in Wuhan funding experiments that may have killed millions of people. Fauci is denying any connection to this at all. What should we believe?
So I do want to push back on you a little bit here because, I think talking about indicting Tony Fauci is a mistake. I think our focus should be on the Chinese.
Well, I don't.
The Chinese did a lot. They spent a lot of money, and a very little bit of that money seems to have come from the NIH. Okay, and Tony Fauci oversaw a multi-billion-dollar budget. This was a small grant, and it was a portion of a small grant. And I think he probably had no idea. Or if he knew about it, it was 5 minutes in the course of a year for him as to what was going on. Now, that doesn't mean he shouldn't answer the questions honestly, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't ask them. But I think making him the villain on this is a mistake. There are lots of other things I would make Tony Fauci the villain on first.
But let me push back on you just for a second on this one specific question. We're in agreement, I think, on Fauci's culpability for a lot of bad decisions. But on this one specifically, the Wade piece says that money came from his agency within NIH. He signed off on it using a loophole that allowed him to get around the federal ban on gain-of-function experiments, and that it went through a middleman to the Institute of Virology and was used specifically on experiments designed to make bat viruses communicable to people. That seems like a pretty clear link to me. I mean, whether he had a lot of things going on at the time or not.
Look, the Chinese were definitely doing that, and EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak have a lot of questions to answer. And I think you're right. I think Fauci does have questions to answer about this. But again, I just want to point out the institute he ran had a multi-billion-dollar budget, and a lot of it was being spent on AIDS research and other, Ebola research, other research. When he says he wasn't entirely sure what the Chinese were doing there, I tend to believe him. Here's my biggest problem with Tony Fauci, okay? When you go back and look at the statements that Tony Fauci has made over the last 20 years, they're astonishing, okay? He is deeply, deeply in love with himself. And he wanted to cure AIDS, and he wanted to get credit for curing AIDS, and it didn't happen, for being the guy who solved the HIV crisis. Okay, so Corona comes along, and he's going to be the guy who saves Corona, and he's going to do it with vaccines. Well, guess what? There have been two actually pretty good drugs that have come out in the last year that have actually helped people with coronavirus. One is dexamethasone, which is an injectable steroid. That came out of a British trial, and the other, the monoclonal antibodies, okay? Those came out basically of private studies. The NIH was involved, but not deeply involved. You've heard very, very little about those. Why? Because Tony Fauci wants the vaccines to end the coronavirus crisis, and he wants credit for it. And, you know, a lot of what he's done in the last year has been pointed towards that. And I think we've made some bad public health decisions as a result.
Well, that's for sure. Let me ask you one last question about the gain-of-function experiments. They're clearly, almost by definition, potentially very, very dangerous. And I think we're living through the consequences of one of them right now. Why would any money from U.S. taxpayers go to support that, whether or not Fauci knew about it? I think it clearly did and was obligated to know. But leaving that aside, why would any money from U.S. taxpayers go towards something like that?
Well, there's been this argument that we should test these viruses, or we should try to make these viruses, you know, sort of more aggressive and able to infect humans better, so that we'll know what viruses in the wild can become more dangerous. I think the Nicholas Wade piece, which obviously you've read too, is just really good at showing why that's such a phenomenally stupid idea and why gain of function shouldn't go on. And Tony Fauci should say that. He should say, we're not going to do this anymore because it's dangerous.
Yeah. Clearly, and as the Wade piece points out, we've had leaks from labs of deadly pathogens virtually every year for 50 years. I mean, there's no lab that's impregnable. But anyway, Alex Berenson,
that's
I appreciate
right.
it. I hope
you know,
you'll
the
come
next
back.
time it'll be worse. Tucker, thanks for having me.
Yeah, been pretty bad. Good to see you.